You're very laborious.
I'm a very labouring individual, I know.
Did you get a good day's work done already? Even though this is,
I'm remodeling the Two Chaps Tower. We've got to make more offices. The staff is growing. It's just good times. Welcome, Monday, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, live show again on a holiday. We're working on
holiday in the United States and maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 other countries. However, if you're watching us from around the globe, this will be a regular work day, isn't it? I mean, just because we're lazy bums and we're actually remodeling the tower, as you heard. So it is Labor Day in the United States, which is a day around the world somehow. It may not always be called Labor Day. Most countries around the world call it May Day. But wait, it's September. How can they call it a day in September May Day? Because the day commemorating the labor movement in different countries around the world is not always on the same day of the calendar. So this is why we are talking about this topic from the perspective of the US Labor Day. Forgive us, because that's where we're based at, and that's what inspired us to talk about this today. We could as well do it on a day in May, and maybe we will in May, and we will totally have forgotten about that we did it in September.
Well, International Workers' Day, and as it is prescribed by the world, right, the big end of the globe. But yes, there's plenty of places around the world that celebrate it on different days and in different ways. In different ways, on different days. What else can I make rhyme with that? I can't.
What do we celebrate? Well, why do we take a day off for Labor Day? So we're not doing labor on the Labor Day. I always struggled with that, with the terminology. But so what exactly are we commemorating or celebrating?
Well, here in the US, of course, I think it celebrates. There's a lot of flag waving, just like there is for a lot of holidays in the US, and it's a celebration of the worker, whatever that is determinate. But usually, it usually means people that have to pick up tools and do manual labor and things like that. But the argument might be said that even, that's kind of more blue collar type of thinking, and as we see here in the US, that's a celebration, and it's a day off for those people, I guess, right? But of course, everybody takes a day off, and even the CEOs, I guess. But that is kind of what I've always understood it to be here in this country. And we have a similar day in Australia. It's in October. It happens around the first weekend of October. But it's kind of not called Labor Day. It's just but it has the same kind of connotation. And there are different countries that do it. But it's the view of labor, the respect for labor, the respect for everybody in the society, in the community, and everybody's job that goes into contributing to its progression, I guess. Yeah.
And I had to look it up because I wasn't quite sure exactly how long ago this was established, and turns out it was in the 1880s, right around the time when industrialization had changed societies around the world significantly in dividing up people into manual labor and maybe more academic work, and maybe, I don't know, farming or whatever types of work people have been doing since then. And Labor Day seems to be, or originally was focused around those who worked in factories, who worked for somebody else as laborers. And it brings up, to me at least, the question or the perspective on this, on the topic of work, in terms of who am I working for? Am I working for myself? Am I working for somebody else? And am I being paid for it? It brings about the analysis of social structures in terms of capital, in terms of equity in society and ownership of property, right? So a topic that can easily be contested or a little bit controversial in many European cultures. The Labor Day, the usually at May 1st or at another May date, is often accompanied by sometimes violent protests. So the labor labor movement takes to the streets, reminding us, the general society, of maybe unfavorable working conditions or unequal treatment of those in different layers of society. And sometimes that gets out of hand. We've seen it usually in certain parts of Berlin in Germany, where they throw Molotov cocktails and set cars on fire and just become very aggressive in their form of expression and protest. And that does not happen this way here in North America. Here in North America, we see these type of outbursts of discontentment, if I may say so, around other social issues here in the United States. Particularly, we've seen that around racial injustice in the recent months. So it's interesting how groups of people go about expressing their dissatisfaction with the status quo in different ways, and how the labor movement is sometimes seen as an aggressor, or as a group of people who are trying to change the status quo. And in other cultures, it's seen as something, oh, well, it is there, it's always been like this, and it's become kind of a folklore or a tradition that we don't pay much attention to. And for others, it's simply a day off from work. So the meaning we give to today, or the purpose behind the day today, seems to be different across cultures. How is it in the cultures that you're most familiar with?
I think that any time you're talking about, it's a common conversation topic for people we're working with and are moving to a country about conversation topics. So if you were to bring up Labor Day in another culture that you were going to, then you might be surprised at the feedback you get. You might, or the response you get, because yes, I mean, in terms of Labor Day being labor being sometimes a good source of organisation for insurgents, for expressing or formulating or fermenting discontent in a large group of people, which can sometimes be ignored by the government or higher echelons of society. But that's sometimes used as underground type of activities. We saw it in, my wife's country of Poland with Solidarność. One might argue that the fall of communism started there with this formation of the labor unions in the north part of the country, and how effective that was to get messages underground and between people in a culture that obviously had mistrust. So it can go to mistrust. It can go to the amount of the amount of power that people have over the worker, and how much, after a while, that becomes kind of old for them.
Right.
Now, in my country of Australia, I guess the viewpoint of the underdog, the viewpoint of the worker, very, very highly respected, and very highly thought of in terms of just the mentality, how we want to be seen to the rest of the world: scrappy, resourceful, hardworking, and that kind of thing. We can espouse even those values, and sometimes, and it even creeps into management. I've seen even CEOs talk about their humble beginnings as a way of saying, this is where I started. I know what you're feeling, right? So it can be a very complicated thing to talk about labor in terms of organized and blue collar type of labor in any culture.
And it struck me as quite different here in the United States. Having grown up in Europe and having moved from Europe to the United States, I recognize that the labor movement, or organized labor, unionized labor, is perceived significantly different in the United States compared to most European cultures that I'm familiar with. Whereas in Europe, unions are being not always seen positive. However, they're part of the game. They're part of the equilibrium of the markets, so to say. They are one element in the equation of collective bargaining, right? And here in the United States, I recognize that they're often seen as either obsolete in today's world, or as something that is a disturbance that is not adding value much to, at least in the states that I've lived in. So I've mostly lived in the southeastern states that are politically more conservative leaning overall, where unionization is sometimes seen as a distractor or a factor that is unbalancing the markets. And I noticed this specifically with a German automotive company coming into Tennessee some 10 years ago. And this is one of the big companies in Europe, one of Germany's biggest organizations, where labor has not just a seat at the table, they own half the table. And where nothing gets decided in that big company of more than, I don't know, they have more than 600,000 people working in that company globally. Nothing gets decided without the labor representation's approval. And in their U.S. subsidiary, in their U.S. organization, labor is not organized the same way as it is in most other plants in that company. And the company wanted the labor organization at headquarters said, we need a similar labor representation in the United States, to which politicians and stakeholders in the state of Tennessee went crazy and said, no, we don't want that. You can't do that. You're not allowing the labor union into your plant. This is going to mess up our whole investment here. This is not going to be good for us. And I was like getting my bucket of popcorn and say, okay, this is going to be interesting. So how is this going to play out? And they actually held a vote, and they allowed the workers at that plant to vote whether they wanted to be represented by a union or not. And the vote was clear that the majority of the workers did not want to be represented by a union, to which the European counterparts, the labor organization in Europe, said, what's wrong with you people over there? Well, why wouldn't you? This is going to be good for you. And the American workers said, we disagree. We think we can find another way of being represented in this organization. So how a society, how a culture views this balance between capital ownership and the labor force, what is the balance between the two, can change significantly depending on the cultural context in which you operate. And here in the US, it's a little bit more confrontational and sometimes, not necessarily fruitful conversations. In many European cultures, the balance between unions and capital is more of a symbiotic relationship. They understand that, yes, we can inflict pain, we can cut a little bit into the flesh of the company. However, we won't cut to the bone. We won't cut off any limbs because it will hurt us as well. So we're in this together. More group orientation. There's a common goal for both of us. In the U.S., unions and capital see each other as, almost staunch opponents, where nobody wants to give anything unless there is some mediation that will make it work. So I found that very interesting, observing that how money, how market balance, how organizing people around a common interest works in different cultures. And Labor Day reminded me of that, how it can be quite different, and that it affects corporate decision making. How do we go about this? Right?
Yeah. And I think there is a perception here that organized labor just means higher costs, right? And there have been people that say that some of the structures here that were set in motion or built up by the union movement here have cost some of the jobs to have had the reverse effect of course, when the globe opened up and countries had to be globally competitive, then we had to basically compete on a global setting. And of course, other countries had lower costs, and we were left with this structure that was here, which had, through a certain amount of time, been very fruitful for the worker, high wages, high benefits, and things like that. Exposed maybe a a point where it wasn't competitive to do that anymore.
Right.
So it was this tension. I mean, we've gone through this tension many times, and you see it in a lot of especially in the Midwest. This is kind of the rust, part of this Rust Belt here, where unionism was a way of it's kind of collectivism, but in a hotbed of individualism, right? Which seems to be a kind of a dichotomy. Yeah.
And there's a documentary on Netflix that I would recommend watching if you haven't seen it yet, American Factory. It's a very, very interesting documentary that sheds some light around that topic as well. And I find, obviously, what you're saying is very true, that the pressure of globalization, or the side effect of globalization, is additional pressure on the markets, on domestic systems that were kind of encapsulated, enshrined within their domestic realm, and now the walls of that shrine have come down, and now the global pressures are in effect on these markets. That's why unionism in its traditional form, in the early 20th century form, may have run its course, and if it didn't adjust, it's out of business, or it's out of effect right now. And this is what we largely see here in the United States. What's interesting, that unions in Europe still play a very distinct role in how work gets organized. So I would attribute that to the more collaborative and symbiotic relationship in which both capital and labor see themselves, and they see themselves as being occupants of the same vessel, of the same boat. We're in the boat together, and unless we want to capsize it, we better find a balance that helps both of us. So markets like Germany, high wage market, high benefits. It's expensive to produce in Germany, yet many German companies are successful on the global scale, despite all their high labor costs, despite all the successes that the unions fought for, because they found a way to make it work global scale. And I'm not an economist. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details how they did that. However, if your national market economy is focused on commodity products that will always be subject to global price wars, then your unionization model might be at risk, right? Then you're not competitive globally anymore, because if another market can produce it cheaper, you're out of luck. So unless a union and capital can mutually help each other develop the labor market to a level that they're just better and more efficient, and their output is supreme to that of the competitors out on the global market, where you don't define yourself over the lowest price, but you define yourself via the best quality that may come at a higher price but is in high demand because of the quality, then unions, or the labor movement and capital ownership, can in fact still work together for the benefit of the laborers and stay competitive on a global scale. So that's, I don't want to make the case for collectivism being the better solution, but in this case, it appears to be, the evidence that we have right now is that more collectivist societies tend to fare better in balancing out the labor organization or the labor movement with capital ownership. But that is my naive, lay person's perspective on economics.
Yeah, well, I don't do math live, so you got me on that. That's somebody will lose an eye if I start to do math in any way, shape, or form. And economics screams of math to me, but that's that's another thing. All I know is that as a business owner in the past, I've certainly, I haven't had to deal with this. It's always been small business, and a few employees, and I've always found that enriching in terms of the access to the people that work with me and alongside me and support the business that I own. I just, it's difficult to imagine without a good, like you say, a good symbiotic relationship in a really large organization, how that couldn't be beneficial for them both to work together to a mutual benefit, instead of it being a zero-sum game where I have to get all I can in order for me to win and get the most out of it. So it's a tough situation, and certainly there are people paid a lot more money than us to work out those things.
I agree, and yet you made a compelling point with the example of Poland. Without, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, without Lech Wałęsa and right, the leader of the Solidarność movement. Without him and his movement, maybe socialism would have survived a lot longer. And I'm not saying that survival of socialism would have been a bad thing. I'm saying that the unjust systems of what used to be the Eastern Bloc ended in large part due to that movement, because they dismantled the monument of socialism in the Soviet realm, and I would argue led to more freedom for not only people of Poland, but also to my culture, to Germany, and to many others in Central and Eastern Europe who had to adjust to a new normal, yes, and yet who are now in a position to be self-determined rather than determined by higher powers. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting now. There's a lot of Polish people that think Lech Wałęsa was a puppet of the Soviets. It's strange.
Interesting.
It's interesting how that argument comes about. I'm yet to kind of close that loop. I'm not quite sure. Let me guess. I had a puppet that was working to work against them. I don't know. Who knows in this world? I mean, these are the kind of theories that pop up. But he's still around. He's still alive. Pretty influential figure, and he's a very polarizing figure. He's a lot of things. But I guess that's come with his maturity and his 2020 vision of looking back on the histrionics that kind of brought those events about. But anyway, that's Labor Day. That is what we are. What are you doing Labor Day? Are you resting? No.
Yes, of course. I'm taking time out. However, I also dedicated a few hours today to bottom line relevant activities. So I did do a little bit of work. All right.
Bottom line relevant activities. Does that mean paid work?
Or maybe not immediately paid work, but leading to paid work in the very near future. That's my euphemism. Bottom line relevant.
Generous, bottom line relevant. That's a good way of putting it. Yes. So it's going to have a positive effect, and that's what we're all about here, trying to have a positive effect, build community. We welcome your comments wherever you are in the world. How do you view Labor Day? How does it play out in your culture? The view of the worker, the view of the worker is it's a pretty wide definition, but the worker, the people that we kind of view, maybe we kind of go past them on the street when they're working on the streets. The people that wouldn't be there if we wouldn't be around if they didn't put in that hard day's work every day, and we appreciate them. Exactly. And certainly, just as everybody does, we honour them and honour the contributions. So, but we want to hear from you. Send us your comments.
We want your contributions. So down here you see LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. No, there's no TikTok. No, there's no Snapchat. No, there should be other things potentially. We don't have them. We are limited in our reach. Forgive us. These 4 have proven to work for us. So this is how you contact us. Use them. Subscribe.
I like how you say limited in our reach. I think it's just essentially limited in ability. Maybe that.
Speak for yourself.
Nice. Well,
back to work.
So, bye everybody.
Bye everybody.